Welcome back. If you're just joining, this is Daybreak Extra coming to you from our studios here in Abuja. And now we are going to look at, like we said, the cancer discussion for this morning, which is understanding cancer and the fight for a cure. Cancer is a disease that affects millions of people worldwide. It is a mysterious and complex enemy that takes lives and leaves families devastated, but we are determined to fight back. Yes, they were determined to fight back. You can actually see a lot of cancer patients, trying to fight back. And there are survivors, actually, some of them out there. So on this segment, we will look at the different types of cancer, their risk factors, symptoms, and treatment options. We will also examine the, cutting-edge therapies and clinical trials that offers hope for a future where cancer is no longer a life-threatening diagnosis. Well, so it's important to understand cancer and fuel the fight for a cure. So we have joining us Faith Abodunrin. She is an internist and a hematologist, an oncologist, also a fellow with the University of Chicago. Thank you so much, Faith, for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so from just my introduction, we want to understand what cancer is, because we know that there are different types of cancer, from the brain tumor to breast cancer to certain cancers that we know, but there are other cancers that a lot of us don't know out there. So can you tell us the different types of cancers that we have?
I think to add to that, we should even start by explaining, cancer. People are not really keen on understanding what cancer is.
Good. I think those are really great questions you both have asked. One of the biggest misconceptions people have about cancer is that it is one disease. It's not really one disease. There are so many types of cancers, at least about 200 types of cancers. And cancers are grouped based on, one, the organs they affect. So as you alluded to earlier on, you had mentioned brain cancer, there are cancer of the kidney, there's cancer of the liver, cancers of different organs. But even down to what we call the microscopic level, that is, if for instance, we take those cells and look at them under the microscope, they also look different. So there's also that. And then if you go down to the molecular level, there are also different kinds of cancer. So within, for instance, lung cancer, we have different kinds of lung cancers, and within that we have different kinds of mutations some of these cancers have. So it's not one disease.
Okay, so I've also seen pictures of mouth cancer, which I've actually lost a friend to that, and it was the first time that I ever came across anything like a mouth cancer. What are the triggers for these cancers? Because we all know that we have these cells, we have the cancer cells, but something triggers it. So what triggers most of these cancer cells?
Also an excellent question. So something like mouth cancer, what we call oral cancers, can be caused by chewing tobacco. So some people who chew tobacco. It's not a common thing in Nigeria, but it's one thing that can cause oral cancers. There's a type of virus called human papilloma virus, HPV. We know that HPV causes cervical cancer, but can also cause something like an oral cancer. Other risk factors, so we know for lung cancer, for instance, smoking is a very important risk factor to know. For some cancers, genetics play a role too, because families, you might see in some families that maybe a grandfather had cancer and maybe a father had cancer. That kind of gives you a hint that maybe there's a genetic component, history that might be predisposing them to getting cancer.
I mean, apart from the genetics, people are quite curious. There seems to be no particular research on saying this is, how we got here, of having various cancer disease, and someone without any lineage, background or history, all of a sudden just find themselves battling this heinous, this scary disease. How can we manage, to not find ourselves in this kind of situation, even though it seems to be like there seems to be little knowledge to it? But how can we manage, to get ourselves away from this disease?
I share the same concern that you have, because while we can say, okay, genetics maybe play a role, and environmental factors like smoking and whatnot also might play a role in cancers, sadly, we don't know everything about cancers. So there's a lot of cancers that I have patients walk up to me in clinic and they ask, Dr. Faith, why do I have cancer? And we really don't have the answer to that. So sadly, for some patients, it might just be inevitable that they develop cancer. Another risk we know is that the older people get, the more likely they are at risk for getting cancer.
Because maybe their immunity is kind of getting low. Is that why?
I'll tell you why. So the thing is, just as the cells age, one of the things about cancer cells, how they grow, is that as they age, cells can get damaged, right? The older they get. And cells that get damaged on the way are more likely to turn into cancer cells, if that makes any sense.
Scarily.
Yes, scary.
Yeah.
You know,
Scary.
but
Yeah.
then, I would love to ask, you know, it progresses as time goes by, before it develops into a full cancer. So what are the processes of, you know, this cancer developing and progressing as time goes by?
That's a lot of science. There's a lot of science behind that. But just to kind of put it briefly to you is, we have in our cells, every cell has what we call the cell cycle. So cells normally divide. They should divide. That's a normal process because that's how we grow, right? So our cells should grow. You can imagine when you're younger, you had one teeth and then you had another teeth, and that's a growth process, right? And that happens to every cell in your body. But the body actually has different mechanisms that prevent these cells from growing wild. Because that's what the problem is with cancer, that the cells grow wild, basically. We want growth. Cells have to grow. That's important. But when the cells find a way to grow outside the normal bounds and the normal restrictions that the human body should have, that's when they become cancer cells. Yeah.
So how about, you know, the treatments? You know, there are different types of treatment, you know, from the chemotherapy to the radiation therapy to the immunotherapy. You know, these are different therapies. So tell us the difference so that people will know the difference and why these therapies are really important.
Excellent. I really love talking about treatment because that's what I do. So surgery is part of the treatment for cancer. So first things first, it depends on what stage you present to the hospital with. So if, for instance, the patient has early stage cancer, it's possible that we can just cure them with surgery. If it's in the very early stage, or maybe also something like radiation therapy, where we have the patient come in and we give them radiation. This works, for instance, for cancers in the lung, in the breast, for instance, that you can just radiate that. But unfortunately, if the cancer has spread from where it started from, let's say, for instance, it's breast cancer, right? Started in the breast and moved to other places, maybe like the bones or whatnot. Then, in that case, you need what we call systemic therapy. That is therapy that will go and meet the cancer cells wherever they are. And that is where chemotherapy, for instance, comes in. So chemotherapy, there are agents that have been on the market for so many years, for as long as 50-some years. So they're literally, when you hear chemo, so chemicals, basically, toxic, very toxic, that we give to the patient. And what they do is they kill cells that are rapidly dividing all around the body. So, and that would mean cancer cells will be affected, but sadly, other cells that rapidly divide will also be affected. So, for instance, our hair cells, our hair grow fast.
Exactly. I actually wanted to ask that question. So why do we see cancer patients always losing their hair?
Exactly, because chemotherapy, chemo drugs, they don't just target cancer cells. They target any cells that is growing fast. Remember I told you about the cell cycle, right? So they affect different parts of the cell cycle to stop cells from growing rapidly. So not just hair cells, some for instance, blood cells that rapidly divide can also go down.
All right, let's talk about early detection. You made mention of that if someone knows at the earliest, then there's a huge chance of fighting it without going through a whole lot of hardship and sadness for him or the person and their family members. So what are the necessary screenings and tests that needs to be done for someone? Because you might be working all healthy and think you're all healthy, not knowing that it's that. So what tests should people, go through on that, and how regular do you think it should be done?
Great question as well. So just looking at the statistics in Nigeria, the most common type of cancer is breast cancer. Following that is prostate cancer. Yeah. And the one after that is cervical or cervical cancer. Yeah. So those three cancers, interestingly, are some of the most preventable cancers that we know that if you can stay on top of it early, you can detect it. So for instance, for breast cancer, we recommend that women above the age of 40 should get what we call a mammogram. So a mammogram is an X-ray of the breast, basically. Some women might also benefit from an ultrasound of the breast, so around the age of 40, and they can do that every 1 to 2 years, and just checking that often, right? But if, for instance, someone has a family history of breast cancer, maybe their mother or grandmother had breast cancer at a fairly early age, then maybe you would think about doing your mammogram earlier than even 40. Yeah, so that's one. For cervical cancer, we have things like pap smear that you can do when you go to your doctors. We also have different things, actually. So for prostate cancer, there's this thing called PSA that can be checked. But I'm sure you guys have some more questions and I can answer. Yeah. I don't want to bore you. It's a very complex.
No, I don't think it would be bore, because this is something that you would agree, based on your profession, that Nigerians are not really knowledgeable about this thing. So if we can get more detailed on this, it would be appreciated. I don't think it would be boring at all. So this for the prostate cancer, which now it's getting scarier because it's getting more younger age now. How often should they do it as well? Is 1 year not too long?
So, for instance, the PSA, which what I talked about, it's called prostate-specific antigen. And that's just a word for a protein that the prostate makes. So if someone has prostate cancer, that is one of the first things that will be high in their blood. The sad thing about that PSA, however, is that it can be high due to other things, not just. Say, for instance, somebody had an infection of the prostate, it can be high also then. But at least you can have it checked. If it is high, the doctor should be thinking about it seriously. Oh, okay, it's high, so maybe we can check it again in another 6 months, in another 3 to 4 months, and you do that. If it, for instance, it was high and then it's going down, the doctor can feel confident that, okay, maybe we can stop checking. But if it's going up and up, then maybe it's time to refer that person to someone called a urologist or a surgeon called a urologist to take a biopsy.
So it's actually, it's really alarming with the way this cancer thing is going. Because I actually have lost a cousin to breast cancer, and it started like she was having this numb feeling and pain on her breast, and the doctor told her use warm water and but they didn't know what it was until she was taken out of the country. But then they stabilized it, but we lost her to it. So at what stage, would women know that they have breast cancer? Because there are some tests or some, examinations that you need to be carrying out at homes like every morning, the way we are taught. But at what point will they know that, oh, I have a lump in my breast and this can actually maybe be cancerous, and, they should rush to the hospital? So at what point?
I think if a woman feels any lump in her breast, that is a good time to, like, if you have even seen a lump, if you felt a lump in your breast, I would recommend that you go to the doctor to at least have a conversation about it. What is this? I'll tell you, there are some lumps you feel in your breast that are not cancer, actually. Sometimes with menstruation, with the menstrual period cycle, sometimes you might have breast pain that is not related to cancer at all.
Well, at this point, when Fatih said, it started with the numbness, I would definitely be alarmed now if I should feel any numbness. I run to the doctor.
Breastfeeding, she gave birth to twins, and so the pains continued, and she had to.
It's really a scary situation.
It's scary, and honestly, I've seen patients who were diagnosed when they were pregnant. So that is also a tricky thing, because how do we give chemo? How do we?
Yeah, you know, you're saying that when you were pregnant, is it possible the child comes out with it?
No. So thankfully, likely not, because from the child to the, things move through the placenta. There's kind of like an immune barrier. There's a barrier that kind of protects the child from those kind of things. So from cells, maybe infections like HIV and stuff can move, but not really cells at that stage.
Okay, so is it, what kind of diet, exercises?
I really want to get there, but before that,
Okay.
Before that, there's this screening for the cervical that you did not mention, and I really wanted to get on that. Women these days now, I think the growth of cervical cancer now is growing rapidly. So what tests, when you wake up and say, I want to go and check and make sure I'm fine, should someone do?
I actually did mention, I said a pap smear.
Oh, I thought it was for the prostate.
No, it actually is for the, so the pap smear. So the pap smear is, you go to your primary care doctor or your obstetrics gynecologist, and they look in there and they take a sample, a swab, and then they send it to the pathologist, and they're able to look at it to see if there's any. That can actually be caught very early, so that is important. But not only that, there is a vaccine called the HPV vaccine that you can give as early as somebody that's 9 years old, 9 to 14. We're actually encouraging that now, because we know that HPV is a very, very strong risk factor for cervical cancer. And if we're able to get ahead of it before girls and boys start having sexual experiences, then that would be good.
I actually wanted to, earlier I was asking, but then let me switch to this question. Is it only a HPV? Because I have this, I don't know if it is true, the ovarian cyst. Is it possible it transforms to cervical cancer as well?
Oh, okay. So that is, so again, just to remember again, you have the vagina, and the cervix is just that part of the genital system that is above the vagina. And then that is different, separate from the ovaries and the fallopian tube that leads into that. Now the ovaries, if somebody has ovarian cyst, it's potentially, maybe there's an ovarian, you can have ovarian cancer from that, but not cervical cancer. Because again, remember, when we look under the microscope, these cells look different. So ovarian cancer is separate, cervical cancer is separate.
So earlier I was trying to ask you about the different types of diets and exercises. A lot of people actually do diets and do lots of exercises, and they don't even know maybe they have some cancer cells that could be triggered by that. So how can that affect the cancer cells to maybe trigger them? How can certain diets and exercises affect?
Great. This is still an area that we are learning about. We don't have all the answers here, but for the most part, I would encourage processed foods. So foods that are processed, highly processed, like foods that have a lot of flour and that are preserved for a long time. There are things we can maybe try to stay away from, because we know that those kind of food can contribute to the damage, which I told you that when cells are damaged, that's when they are more likely to grow, right, into cancer cells. So that is a major thing that I would say, processed foods. And sadly, in a place like Nigeria, we are gradually becoming like the Western world, where we're eating those kind of things. We need to go back to eating just, good old vegetables, fruits, home cooked meals that we can tell that, oh, this is what they put in it. If you're not able to tell what they put in your food, some of this, things we use in cooking, the components of them, we don't really know. So those are the things that we're finding to be associated with cancer. Exercise, I've found, is actually helpful for against cancer. So in general, we encourage that people do weight-bearing exercises if they can. So that is, if you can, even if it's low weights or something, take walks multiple times daily, right? Because we know that even if obesity is actually a risk factor, I didn't mention, obesity is a risk factor for cancers like breast cancer. So if, for instance, someone is overweight, they can be at higher risk for cancer. For that, yeah.
Okay, so what kind of support should families be giving their cancer patients at home? And two questions in one.
Sure.
And how often are these therapies, the chemo, the immunotherapy, and how often, when a person is actually carrying a cancer, should be going for these therapies?
Yeah, that's a very complex question, honestly, because every cancer at a different stage requires a different prescription, basically. So, for instance, I would not treat someone who has stage 2 cancer the same way I would treat someone with stage 4 cancer. Sometimes I wouldn't even use the same kind of chemo drugs, okay? But let's say somebody has stage 4 cancer. This is like they've come with the worst of the worst cancer, right? Depending on what kind of cancer it is, we have different chemo drugs for that. And different immunodrugs that we know, because at the University of Chicago, for instance, where I work, we do a lot of clinical trials. And when we do clinical trials, when we see what works, those things now become what we call standard of care. That becomes how we treat patients. So for instance, let me maybe give an example of something like maybe breast cancer, for instance. Breast cancer, you can give chemo literally every, let's say every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks is possible. That there are some regimens that are that often. Yeah,
all right, so
on.
let's go on a quick break, and when we come back, we'll continue this discussion. Stay with us.
The Northwest Governors Forum, in collaboration with the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, welcomes you to a 2-day Northwest Peace and Security Summit with the theme, Regional Cooperation for Securing Lives and Livelihoods in Northwest Nigeria. Keynote speaker, His Excellency Bola Ahmed Tinubu, GCFR, President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, Federal Republic of Nigeria. Host governors, Governor Dikko Umar Rada, Katsina State, and Chairman, Northwest Governors Forum, Governor Obasani, Kaduna State, Governor Dauda Lawal, Zamfara State, Governor Abba Kabir Yusuf, Kano State, Governor Umar Namadi, Jigawa State, Governor Nasir Idris, Kebbi State, and Governor Ahmed Aliu, Sokoto State. Date, June 24th and 25th, 2024. Venue, Katsina State Government House. Time, 9 a.m. daily. Media partner, Media Trust Group. This is Trust TV, documenting the Nigerian story.
Welcome back. So let's go back to our discussion. So thank you so much, Dr. Faith.
Yes.
Let me call you that at this point. So we talked about the ovarian cyst, the difference with the cervical cancer and all. So what about the research, on how to cure this cancer? Is it even possible in the first place?
Yeah, just again to take you back again, I want to remind you, cancer is not one disease, right? Yeah. So, but there are some cancers that are curable. There are some cancers that are curable, especially if you catch it early. But historically, as oncologists, we try not to use the word cure. Because, if somebody has, I don't know, a cold, you can cure them, right? But we sometimes don't think about cancer that way, because we rather like to use the word remission. That is, the patient is, we've kept it's under control. We cannot see any obvious signs of cancer. Maybe when we look at the imaging and the patient doesn't have any symptoms anymore of cancer. But maybe in 10 years,
it could come back.
Yeah. So did we really cure them? We can't say that. So we prefer to use the word remission. And yes, there are some cancers that we've been able to get to that point. And that is where a lot of the newer drugs, like immunotherapy that you're saying, and maybe just to talk about immunotherapy a little. So one of the best tools to fight against cancer in our bodies is actually our immune system, right? your immune system is not just to fight against infection, malaria, or cold or whatever. It also helps you fight against cancer. But the problem is sometimes cancer cells are smart, and they find a way to hide from our immune system. So when we give the patient immunotherapy, what we are doing is we're helping their immune system recognize the cancer cells better so that they can kill. So basically what we're doing is we're helping the patient's immune system better recognize the cancer cells and kill them.
Okay, so the symptoms.
No, this particular thing, can I do it? Even though there is no, just for anybody that just wants to take preventive measures, can that person go and do it without any detection?
No.
Why not?
No.
I mean, I want to fight it.
No.
Yeah, so I think
mentioning the fact that it's sneaky, it's quite scary.
I know.
So we've seen Gavi, giving out vaccines for HPV. Just I think about 14 million young girls were vaccinated. Tell us what that would do for them, because we have this, people that are not actually accepting these vaccines for their children because they have these misconceptions about vaccines generally, not just the HPV. I've seen people fighting against the vaccines for polio, for
even COVID,
and what have you. So let them know what this would be for their girl child growing up, because you've mentioned certain age that it will start showing up for those that maybe may have it and they wouldn't know. So what these vaccines will do for them is what we want to know.
Yeah, so these vaccines, they expose the patient to the HPV earlier on so that your immune system can develop antibodies and build your immune system. So you have a more robust immune system to fight against HPV when you finally get exposed to it. And so if your body gets exposed to HPV, then it's less likely for HPV to cause cancer in the cells, because one thing people need to know is that HPV is directly linked with cervical cancer. It's not like we're guessing. This is not a guess. This is what we know, that is established, that this HPV, if you let it ride in cells and they grow in cells, they will cause a damage to the DNA. Again, I'm using the word damage because we know when you cause damage, you cause cervical cancer to develop. So I just want to encourage any family out there, parent out there, please, you're not a lab rat, I promise you. These are things that have been tested. These are things that are trusted. And we try to make sure that we go through the due process of clinical trials. They have to work first before we even put it on the market. So, yes.
And one thing that, a lot of people have concerns about is the cost of these therapies, the chemotherapy, the radiation and what have you. What other measures can they take at home if they don't have the means to go for this chemotherapy? That's after they have been diagnosed of cancers.
That is a very tough thing. For me, for a person like me that studies about cancer, does research in cancer, treats cancer, I know that the only way you can kill cancer is really by giving the medications. So people have some local herbal things that they are coming up with. Maybe it works, I don't know, but they haven't been tested like in what we call a large randomized trial. That is, before we give, I don't know, chloroquine for malaria, we studied it. We made sure we studied it in a trial that shows that chloroquine works for malaria. That's how we use it. But for some of these herbal medications, we don't know. They haven't been tested on 100, 200,000 people or something for us to know that it works. Do you understand? And the sad thing is some of them are harmful, right? So I don't know. I would just hope that if someone was in that situation, that somehow they have a means to get in for it.
I mean, one of the things that tend to help is research. At least it gives hope to people, saying, okay, there are things going on in order to find final solutions to this problem. So in your field, is there any hopeful research that is saying, okay, well, at least getting somewhere for people suffering with this disease to be a bit optimistic?
And hopeful.
Hopeful. Yes. Immunotherapy you probably don't know, in the last, it just came out in the last 10 years. It wasn't on the market before. So that's a huge advancement we've made within the last few years. Not only that, now, I kind of said earlier on too that some of these cancer cells have developed what we call mutations. So in the cell cycle, right, that causes the growth of cells, some of the proteins there have mutations that we can target. So we can make drugs that would target those mutations. So those type of therapy, we call them targeted therapies. Now this is next level. What that means is we take the person's cancer cells, look at it in the lab to see if they have a mutation. And if they have a mutation, then we have a medicine, sometimes even an oral medication that they don't even need to come to the hospital today, they can take at home. And we can give them that medication. And for instance, in lung cancer, this is an example of a cancer where patients have a lot of mutations in the cancer cells. We have a lot of targeted therapies that work. Yes, so.
Okay, it's good that you said targeted therapies, because I actually was going to ask that, but you've answered. But then the question I would like to ask is the HPV vaccines. Are there a certain age that needs to take the vaccine, or even as we can still go for the vaccine? So people actually know it's not just meant for younger people. But are there tests that we need to carry out before collecting these vaccines?
Oh, that's good. So for the most part, you really don't need a lot of tests. You don't need any tests before an HPV, especially if you're not currently infected with anything, or if you don't have any major history. You don't really need any test to get that. We encourage 9 to 14. You know the reason why? Because we know HPV is transmitted sexually. So that kind of falls around the age where people haven't had a sexual experience yet. By the time they have a sexual experience, they probably have already been exposed to HPV.
So is it possible?
More vulnerable.
Is it possible that, like you said, it's sexually transmitted? Like some of these sexually transmitted diseases, from what to herpes to gonorrhea and what have you. Is it possible if you've had that history and you can actually contract the human papilloma virus as well?
It's more likely that if somebody has something like that, is sexually transmitted infections, because they go together. Most of these STIs or STDs, as we call them, go hand in hand together. So it's likely that they've received it.
Okay, so we know for a fact that there are people that decided to donate a number of these particular vaccines for Nigerians, and that's why the targeted age was pushed there. But now there seems to be a low number. Nigerians are not really welcoming it. We've seen viral video, Fatima mentioned earlier on that one. And because of that, people are not really welcoming it. So again, I would pipe on her question. Can I go and take it? We don't have to put it like that.
Oh
if you don't want it, I want it.
You can, just to put it like you can. In the US, for instance, they're pushing it as high as for age 45. So you can.
Okay, so quickly,
if your doctor is okay with giving you,
so quickly, the signs and symptoms of all these diseases are similar, from headaches to what have you. But what are the uncommon signs that one should know that they maybe have some
pay
sort
attention
of pay attention to when it comes to cancer?
Okay, I know you did mention headache, but I just want to say again at baseline, if you are having unexplainable weight loss that it's not as if you started a diet or you started exercising and just out of nowhere you lose, 20, 30 kilograms out of nowhere. Very concerning. You should be very, very concerned. But there are some other things. So, for instance, people with lung cancer can have what we call hemoptysis. That is when you cough up blood. That could be due to tuberculosis, but it can also be due to cancer. So you want to check that out. We have things like when you go to stool, right, your bowel movement, if, for instance, there's a change in the size of it, maybe it becomes like more pencil-like, Those are things to be concerned about. Fatigue that you cannot really explain, just so tired. It could be due to anything, but I would still put that. I will not go to my doctor and say, hey, doctor, do I have cancer? But they should be thinking, they should really be testing and thinking and asking you those questions. Yes. Headaches, as you mentioned, for brain tumors. Some people can have numbness in one hand or like a seizure. That can be due to cancer that has moved to the brain.
Wow. Alarming. But quickly, for our viewers who are perhaps at this stage scared of cancer, what message do you have for them?
There is hope. There is hope. Because people like myself and so many others around the world have made this their life's mission to try to find the cure, even though we try to shy away from that word, cure, because we know we are not God, but we want to really thoroughly understand the science, because we know that if we can understand the science behind cancer cells, then we can understand which drugs will work the most effectively. So we are working all the way from early prevention to how we treat the patients to even something called palliative care. Right, and palliation, that is when maybe the person might say, wow, I've seen how people go through cancer, how they get chemotherapy, how they lose their hair, and I don't want that for myself. And they might say, I just want to go back to my maker that way. That is something called palliative care. So in that case, we'll take care of their pain, we'll take care of giving them emotional support, right? So all the way from prevention to that stage we are actually working on
really
that.
helpful.
So there is hope. There is hope.
There is hope. I mean, we have to leave our viewers with that word. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Dr. Faith Abodunrin.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
That was a bunch of knowledge, and we've taken something from it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Indeed. All right. And with that, of course, we wrap up Daybreak Extra on Trust Television. Thank you so much for staying with us. Hope you took a thing or two from all of the message that was put out there today. I am Summayya Abubakar. Do have a lovely day.